Some scars don't fade with time. They just settle beneath your skin like splinters you learn to live with. Every so often, a breeze carries a sound or a smell stirs a memory. And suddenly, you're no longer in the present. You're right back in the middle of it. That's what happened to me last week when I smelled honeysuckle drifting up from the roadside. In an instant, I was 14 again, standing barefoot on the steps of a shotgun house, about to be handed over like cattle. My name is Victoria Andrews. I'm 76 years old, and I live alone now in a small blue house on the edge of Medora, North Dakota. Folks around here know me as the church pie lady, the one with silver curls and a stubborn streak wide as the Badlands. They see a sweet old woman who knits baby blankets and hums Patsy Cline songs. They don't know I once lived in a cage that looked like a mansion. They don't know that the freedom I enjoy today was bought with pain, silence, and a long, cold ride through the dark. I was born in 1948, the oldest girl of 8 children, in a dirt-poor farmhouse about 15 miles outside Medora. We didn't have much, just 5 rooms strung together with uneven floors, drafty windows, and a roof that leaked every spring. The house was so narrow you could have fired a shotgun through the front door and hit daylight clean out the back. My daddy, Walter Andrews, worked other people's land. He spent his life bent over in fields that were never his, coaxing barley and wheat from the ground while praying the hail would spare us. My mama, Evelyn, kept the house with a wooden spoon in one hand and her Bible in the other. She was a quiet woman, but sharp as a blade when it came to discipline. I loved her fiercely, even when her silence hurt more than her words ever could. Being the eldest meant I belonged to Mama. I was her right hand. By the time I was 7, I could make cornbread from scratch and keep 3 toddlers clean enough to pass church inspection. I washed laundry in the creek and hung it to dry on wire lines that sang when the wind blew. We were all just surviving, but back then, I thought it was life. I didn't know any different. School was a luxury. The one-room schoolhouse was 3 miles down a dusty road, and during harvest or planting season, Daddy needed all hands, including mine. So I learned to read by oil lamp, sounding out words from an old Sears catalog and dog-eared almanacs that Mama kept in a wooden crate. Once in a while, Miss Harper the teacher would give me books to borrow, and I'd stay up past midnight under my covers, devouring stories about cities and trains and women who wore shoes every day of the week. We weren't the poorest family around, but we were close. Meat was a Sunday blessing. Most meals were boiled potatoes and whatever we could grow or trap. I had 1 pair of shoes, worn thin at the heel, and 1 doll made of a corn cob wrapped in muslin. But I had dreams. I had them so bright and clear it hurt. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to ride a bus to Bismarck and see what real sidewalks looked like. I wanted to own a dress that had buttons all the way down the back. My favorite place in the world was the big cottonwood tree behind our house. It had branches like arms and a crook just high enough to sit in and spy the horizon. From there, I could see far past the patchwork of wheat fields, all the way to the dusty ribbon of Highway 85. That road was my dream. That road meant escape. But life doesn't care much for dreams. It has a way of sneaking up on you when you're elbow deep in biscuit dough, thinking about nothing more than whether the milk's gone sour. It was on one of those ordinary mornings in June, hot enough to sweat before breakfast, that my life took a turn I couldn't undo. I was 14, barefoot, with flour on my arms and hope in my chest. My little sister Lily was singing off-key beside me, and Mama was silent, her face drawn like a tight bedsheet. And then Daddy called my name. He said it the way he said it when he meant business. Victoria Ruth, come in here. The spoon slipped from my hand. My breath caught. Mama didn't look up. That was the first moment I felt the edge of it, the cut of something wrong. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped through the doorway, leaving childhood behind me, forever. Daddy was sitting in his worn-out armchair, the only one with a cushion and a patch sewn into the back where his shoulders had rubbed it bare. His hat sat on one knee, a rolled cigarette pinched between his fingers. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me like I was a cow at auction. Sit, he said finally, nodding toward the wooden stool near his boots. My legs moved on their own. My hands folded neatly in my lap like I was in church, but inside I was shaking. Something in his eyes made my heart race, even before he spoke. You're 14 now, he said, striking a match against the sole of his boot. Time for you to grow up. I blinked, confused. Was this about my cycle? Mama had already given me a clipped explanation about it last year, along with a folded rag and instructions not to talk about it. But Daddy wouldn't bring that up. He never did. We've arranged a marriage for you, he said next, like he was telling me we'd traded the mule for a wagon. At first, I didn't understand. I stared at him, trying to find the punchline. Marriage, I whispered. He didn't look at me, just took a long drag from his cigarette and exhaled slowly. Your betrothed's already settled everything. You'll go to his house tomorrow. My breath turned to ice. I don't want to get married. Daddy. The words slipped out before I could stop them. His hand slapped the arm of the chair so hard I flinched. Ain't no wantin' it. Victoria Ruth. Women don't get to want. They do as they're told. Same as your mama. Same as her mama before that. I started to tremble, not from fear exactly, but from something colder shock. Disbelief. Who is he? I managed to say, my voice barely more than a croak. Douglas Whitmore, he said flatly. You know him. Owns the grain elevator outside town. Lives up on the hill in that big house with the white pillars. I knew exactly who Douglas Whitmore was. Everyone in Medora did. He was a widower, nearly 50, with 3 grown sons, the youngest older than me by a good 10 years. He was also the richest man for 5 counties around. Daddy took our wheat to his elevator every fall. Mama bought soap and flour on credit at the store he owned. He's old enough to be my grandfather, I said, standing up without meaning to. My voice cracked on the last word, and then came the slap. It was fast and mean, catching me on the left cheek and sending me back onto the stool. My eyes watered instantly. I tasted blood. You'll marry him and be a respectable woman, Daddy said coldly. Douglas paid a good dowry for you. Don't make trouble. In that moment, something inside me folded. It didn't break, at least not yet, but it bent in a way I wouldn't fully understand until much later. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I sat there on that stool with a stinging face and the weight of a whole different life crashing down on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the pallet next to Lily, our bare feet brushing. She was only 8, still smelling like sunshine and soap. She rolled over and whispered, "Why are you crying?" Victoria. I didn't answer. How could I explain that tomorrow I would be sent away like a goat to slaughter, that I'd never climb the cottonwood again or see her freckles by firelight, that I wasn't going to be her big sister anymore, just someone's property? So I held her close, breathed her in, and stared at the rafters until the first light of dawn crept in. By morning, Mama had laid out my Sunday dress, the blue cotton one with with the sagging hem and worn sleeves. She brushed my hair with trembling hands and braided it down my back. Her eyes, red-rimmed and tired, finally met mine. "Be strong, my baby," she whispered. But we both knew she didn't believe that. Not really. Out front, a black sedan waited, shiny and foreign against the dirt road. Mr. Whitmore stood beside it, tall in a pressed gray suit, his silver hair combed neat, his eyes cold and assessing. "Beautiful girl," he said when he saw me. "You'll give me fine sons." My stomach turned. Daddy stood behind me, his hand firm on my shoulder. I turned, looked one last time at the house where I'd learned to read, to laugh, to dream. The wood was splintered, the porch sagging, but it was mine. As the car door closed and the engine started, dust rose behind us. I watched the only home I'd ever known disappear through the rear window. And just like that, I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was a bride and a prisoner. The ride to the Whitmore estate felt like a funeral procession, except there was no casket, only me. A 14-year-old girl in a faded blue dress, sitting beside a man who smelled like cologne and bourbon, glancing at me every so often like he was sizing up a horse he'd just purchased. The car bumped along the gravel road, each jolt a reminder that I was leaving behind everything I knew, my mother's hushed songs, Sam's rough laughter, Lily's tiny arms around my neck at night. Those things were slipping away in the dust behind us, replaced by a mansion I'd only ever seen from afar, like a warning carved into the hillside. Douglas Whitmore said nothing as we drove. He didn't have to. His silence was heavy, like wet wool, and I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, willing myself not to cry. When we finally arrived, the house looked even larger, up close white columns reaching skyward like they held up heaven itself. The place reeked of money, of power. It had none of the warmth of our creaky little home. There were no toys in the yard, no laundry flapping on a line, no muddy boots by the porch, just stillness. Waiting at the front steps was a woman in a gray dress that matched the stone beneath her feet. She had her hair pulled back so tight I couldn't see where it started, and her face had that hard, polite look that didn't invite questions. "Welcome, Miss Andrews," she said, her voice as crisp as an apple picked too early. "I'm Mrs. Hendrickson, the housekeeper. I'll help you prepare." She didn't say for what, but I knew. Inside. The air was cool and dim. It smelled like beeswax polish and something floral I couldn't name. Paintings lined the walls, men and women with unsmiling eyes that followed you when you walked. My feet sank into thick rugs that felt like moss, and I couldn't help but feel like I'd walked into someone else's life, someone much older, someone who belonged here. But I didn't. Not one bit. Mrs. Hendrickson led me upstairs to a bedroom larger than our entire house. A white dress lay spread across a four-poster bed. Next to it were satin undergarments and silk stockings finer than anything I'd ever touched. "Mr. Whitmore wants you presentable," she said, looking down at my cotton dress like it was made of rags. "The bathroom is through there. Wash thoroughly. I'll return in 30 minutes. She shut the door behind her, and I just stood there. The room was silent, but my heart wasn't. I glanced at the tall windows that stretched nearly to the ceiling. For one wild moment, I imagined running to one, climbing out, disappearing into the hills. But where would I go? Who would take me in? I had no money, no education, no legal way to survive. I was trapped, as surely as if I were locked behind bars. When Mrs. Hendrickson returned, she helped me dress. Her hands were brisk and impersonal, tugging at ribbons and fasteners like I was a mannequin. She didn't say anything about the bruise that was already fading on my cheek from Daddy's slap. She didn't ask if I was afraid. The ceremony took place just before sunset in the small Whitmore family chapel tucked at the far edge of the estate. There were no flowers, no music, no friends, just a few men in suits who worked with Mr. Whitmore and Mrs. Hendrickson standing off to the side like a sentinel. Daddy was there, of course, sitting in the front row wearing his only decent shirt. He didn't smile. He didn't even look at me. The preacher mumbled through a few verses about obedience and duty words I didn't understand but felt heavy in my gut. He never mentioned love. Not once. Do you, Victoria Andrews, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? He asked. It wasn't a question. Not really. I do, I whispered. I don't know if anyone even heard me. Afterward, there was a quiet reception in the dining hall. Men drank champagne and ate tiny sandwiches, speaking in low voices that stopped when I passed. I stood in the corner like a ghost in lace. I didn't eat. I couldn't. My father left before I could say goodbye. He shook Douglas Whitmore's hand, nodded once at me like a man handing off a burden, and climbed into a neighbor's truck. $20 richer than that morning. $20. That's what I was worth to him. As darkness fell and the last guest vanished, Mrs. Hendrickson approached me again. Her expression was unreadable. Mr. Whitmore is waiting for you in the master bedroom, she said softly, her tone almost kind. Top of the stairs. End of the hall. I didn't move at first. My legs felt like stone. But finally, I climbed the stairs, one by one, as if I were walking to the gallows. The hallway was silent, except for the soft ticking of a grandfather clock below. I reached the door, raised my hand to knock, then remembered I didn't have to knock. It was my room now, too. I opened the door, and I stepped inside. What happened next is something I will never describe, not in detail, not in this lifetime. Some things are too cruel for words. Some memories don't fade. They root themselves inside you, like winter in your bones. But I will say this, that night, I stopped being a girl, and I started being something else, something I didn't recognize. I woke up the next morning, curled on the edge of the bed, the finest bed I'd ever slept in, and the coldest. The sunlight filtered in through tall lace curtains, soft and golden, and for a split second, I forgot where I was. Then I shifted, and the pain brought it all rushing back. My body was no longer mine. It belonged to someone else now, signed over like a deed. The room was still and silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. Douglas was gone, but his scent lingered in the room bourbon, cigars, sweat, and something mean underneath. I lay there for a long time, watching shadows stretch across the ceiling. Eventually, Mrs. Hendrickson knocked and came in without waiting. Her eyes glanced at the pillow damp with tears, the bruises blooming at the edges of my neck. She said nothing, only opened the wardrobe and laid out a dress I didn't recognize. Breakfast is in the sunroom at 9. Mr. Whitmore expects you to be punctual. She left me there in that silence, standing barefoot on the rug, unsure whether to cry or scream. Instead, I did what I'd been taught my whole life. I obeyed. The Whitmore mansion was larger than our town school and church combined. It had 20 rooms, though I was only allowed in 6. There was a drawing room I wasn't to sit in, a parlor I wasn't to speak in, and a study I was never to enter unless invited. There were thick carpets, high ceilings, and chandeliers that twinkled like stars. And yet, I'd never felt so small, so swallowed up. Douglas had rules. So many rules. I was to wake at 6:30, bathe and dress in clothes selected by Mrs. Hendrickson. My hair was to be done neatly, always braided, never loose. Makeup was allowed on Sundays, but nothing garish. No letters were to be written without his approval. No phone calls unless he was present. No visitors. No walks past the rose garden. No shoes on the upstairs rugs. No opinions unless directly asked. "You are a lady now," he said once, when I asked if I could take a tray to the kitchen myself. "Your hands are not for labor. They are for bearing children and resting gracefully in your lap." That was how Douglas saw women decorations with wombs. He expected me to greet his business associates at dinner, to smile, nod, and laugh on cue. They called me young Mrs. Whitmore in the way someone might say that pretty little filly. They all knew. The way they looked at me, the way they avoided my eyes, the way they never asked about my family, it was clear. Everyone knew what kind of arrangement this was. They just didn't care. The staff didn't speak to me much, not unkindly, but distantly. The maids treated me like one of the portraits in the hallway, something to dust around, not disturb. The cook never asked if I wanted anything specific. Meals arrived precisely on time and were cleared away whether I touched them or not. I was lonely in a way that has no name. I missed Sam's goofy jokes. I missed Lily's warm breath on my arm at night. I missed Mama's quiet humming when she stirred biscuit dough in the morning. Even the things I thought I hated, Daddy's boots stomping on the porch, the wind howling through broken windows, the slap of laundry on the line, I missed them all. I missed being someone. One afternoon, maybe a month in, I stood at the edge of the garden near the west wing. The sun was out, and for once, the air didn't feel heavy. The flowers were in full bloom, peonies and lilies and wild roses in neat, perfect rows. I reached down and plucked a small bud, just to hold something alive. "You don't have permission to pick those." Douglas's voice came from behind me like thunder. I dropped the flower. He walked around me, bending to pick it up, and held it between his fingers. "This estate is curated," he said slowly, like he was teaching a child. "Every petal in place. You don't pluck what you don't understand." He handed the flower to Mrs. Hendrickson without another word and walked off. I stood there, my fists clenched, something burning in my chest I couldn't name. That night, he didn't come to my room. The next, he did, and I endured it, as I always did, floating somewhere above myself, pretending I was a ghost, or a bird, or someone else entirely. Then came the mist period. At first, I thought it was just the stress, but when the second month passed, Mrs. Hendrickson knocked gently one morning with a knowing look in her eyes. She sent for the doctor. The examination was clinical. Cold hands, colder words. "Congratulations," he said. "You're expecting." Douglas was delighted as a man like him could be. He didn't smile, but his tone softened. "A boy," he said, resting a possessive hand on my stomach, which was still flat. "A proper heir." He gave me a necklace that day. Pearls, real ones. They felt like marbles around my neck, heavy and tight. "You wear this when we have company," he said. "You'll look the part now." I nodded. Because what else could I do? It was the first time since arriving that I felt anything resembling power, not over him, but over myself. This child, however it came to be, was something of mine, something he couldn't take away. And that's when the thought crept in. What if I could leave? What if I could go somewhere no one knew who Victoria Whitmore was? It sounded impossible, but impossibility, when you're desperate enough, can start to look a lot like hope. It was still just a whisper, that thought, a seed waiting to root, but it was there now, alive. The air had started to cool by the time October rolled into Medora. The cottonwoods turned gold, the mornings held frost in their teeth, and the sun dipped earlier each day. I spent more time on the back porch, bundled in one of the wool cardigans Mrs. Hendrickson allowed me to wear. It was the only place in the house where I felt even remotely like myself, watching the wind kick up dry leaves, pretending the world out there might still belong to me somehow. It was on one of those afternoons that Mrs. Parker, the maid with a kind face and nervous hands, appeared beside me, speaking so low I barely caught it. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "there's someone at the kitchen door asking for you." I turned slowly. "Who?" She glanced back toward the house like someone might be listening. "He says his name is Samuel. Said he's your brother." The world tilted. Sam. I stood so fast the chair nearly toppled behind me. "Where is he?" "I sent him away," she said quickly, clearly terrified. Mrs. Hendrickson was upstairs with the butcher, but if she'd seen, he said he'd wait by the old oak tree near the boundary wall, said to tell you he needs to talk to you, important like. My heart galloped inside my chest. I hadn't seen Sam in almost a year. The thought of him standing out there, alone, in the chill wind of late October, made my feet move before my brain caught up. Douglas was away on business in Bismarck. Mrs. Hendrickson was distracted. I had a window, small and dangerous, but real. "Cover for me," I whispered. "Please. I'll be back before anyone notices." She looked stricken, but then she gave one tight nod. "Be quick, ma'am, and be careful." I didn't walk, I ran. Across the south lawn, crouched low beside the hedgerow. My boots barely touched the ground. I ducked behind the rose arbor, past the stables, and through the orchard until I reached the crumbling stone wall at the back of the property. And there, leaning against the ancient oak, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, was Sam. He was taller than I remembered, his boyishness thinning into something sharper. The sun caught on his unruly hair, and that familiar chipped tooth peeked through his grin. "Victoria," he whispered. We collided. I wrapped my arms around him, and he held me like I might blow away. I felt 16 again for a heartbeat, his little sister, not someone's property. He pulled back and scanned my face, his smile faltering. "You look tired." "I am." "You eating enough, trying? Are you? Is he?" I shook my head. "Don't." He nodded, jaw tightening. We sat under the oak tree like we had when we were kids, legs crossed, talking in low voices. "Everyone misses you," he said. "Lily cries sometimes. Mama, too, though she tries to hide it. And Daddy." He paused, looking away. "He drinks more now, doesn't talk much." I didn't want to hear about Daddy, not after what he'd done, not after the way he'd traded me off for a pocket full of bills and cleared debt at the grain store. But Sam kept talking. "I've been working odd jobs," he said, "saved up enough for a bus ticket. I came here to find you, heard things, Victoria, things about Whitmore, what he did to his first wife." I went still. "What things?" Sam's voice dropped to a hush. "That she didn't die in childbirth, that he hurt her. People say she tried to run. Say she lost the baby before she died. The cold October air suddenly felt like ice in my lungs. I'd wondered, once, when he'd muttered her name in his sleep, Catherine, when he'd called me by it, when he'd gripped my wrist too tightly and whispered, "You'll give me sons if it kills you." "I'm fine," I said, though my voice broke on the lie. "I'm pregnant." Sam's face paled. His gaze dropped to my stomach. I wasn't showing yet, but my hands instinctively folded over the space where a life quietly grew. "All the more reason to leave," he said. "Now, before he finds a reason to take it from you. Where would I go?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. "A cousin in Bismarck. Says you can stay till you find work. I know a guy with a truck. He can take you to the bus station in Dickinson. I've got money for the fare." I looked at him, at the hope burning behind his eyes. A fragile, dangerous thing. "I can't," I whispered. Why not? I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I had too many fear, exhaustion, the weight of all the rules, and the baby. But something inside me stirred, that whisper of possibility, louder now. Then a voice rang out across the lawn. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mrs. Hendrickson." She was storming toward us, flanked by 2 groundskeepers, her face a thundercloud. "Go," I hissed, shoving Sam toward the wall. Now he gripped my hands tight. "I'll come back. I'll find a way." And then he was gone, vanishing into the woods beyond the property. "Mrs." Hendrickson reached me, breath sharp, hands on her hips. "There will be consequences," she said through clenched teeth. "You've disappointed Mr. Whitmore." I said nothing, just turned, chin high, and walked back toward the house. But inside, something had changed. I was done surviving. I was going to run. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, hands on my belly, eyes fixed on the ceiling as the house settled into its nighttime hush. Somewhere down the hall, the grandfather clock ticked away, the seconds like a slow, methodical warning. I knew what was coming. Douglas returned from Bismarck just after sunset the next evening. I heard the gravel crunch under the car tires, the front door open, the low murmur of greetings from Mrs. Hendrickson. I was standing by the window when she called for me. "He's in the study," she said, her voice low but pointed. "He asked for you." My legs felt like lead, but I walked. His study was a dark, wood-paneled room that always smelled of cigars and oiled leather. The fire was lit. He sat behind his massive desk, a crystal glass half full in front of him. His eyes flicked up when I entered. Unreadable. "You've disappointed me, Victoria." He said it so quietly. It chilled me more than if he'd shouted. I stood near the doorway, hands clasped together. It was my brother. I said, I hadn't seen him in months. He came to tell me about home. "Your home is here." His voice had that brittle edge now, like glass under pressure. "The child you carry is your home. That house in the hills is your past. You don't look backward." I swallowed hard. He didn't hurt anyone. He just needed to see I was safe. Douglas stood. He didn't move quickly. He never did. Everything he did was slow, deliberate, like a man who'd never needed to rush, because the world bent to his timing. "I own this house," he said. "Every brick, every tree, every breath inside it. You are no exception." When he crossed the room toward me, I braced myself. His hand struck my face, harder than Daddy's ever had. I tasted blood instantly sharp and coppery. My knees buckled, but I didn't fall. I wouldn't give him that. He grabbed my wrist next and dragged me forward, hissing in my ear. "You're forbidden to leave this house again. No walks, no garden, no letters. If that boy or anyone from that filthy farm comes near this place again, I'll have them arrested. He threw me back, and I hit the arm of the leather chair behind me, my side flaring with pain. Then he turned away, back to his desk, like I was nothing more than an object that had disappointed him. You're dismissed. I didn't run. I walked. Slowly, every step measured. By the time I reached my room, the pain in my side was a drum beat, but it was the ache between my ribs that stayed with me, that pulsing throb of helplessness. That night, the bleeding started. It began with a dull cramp in my lower back that curled around my abdomen like a tightening fist. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing. But by midnight, the sheets were stained a dark, terrifying red. Mrs. Hendrickson found me doubled over near the stairs, clutching my side, tears pouring silently down my face. A doctor came, said little, and left even faster. Miscarriages happen, he mumbled, as if this was just a natural mishap. Best not to dwell. Douglas never came to see me. He stood at the door once, then turned away. No words, no hand on my shoulder, no mention of the child we had lost, or, more accurately, the child I had lost, while he continued on, untouched. But I grieved, not just for the baby, though I did more than I expected. It didn't matter how that life had started. It had been mine. It had been hope. I grieved for myself, too, for the girl who had believed for even one moment that endurance would be enough, that obedience might earn freedom. I stayed in bed for days. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn. The pearl necklace Douglas had given me hung limp from the vanity mirror, mocking me. One afternoon, Mrs. Parker came in quietly and placed a steaming cup of tea on my nightstand. I hadn't said much to her in weeks, but she lingered now. I knew a girl like you once, she whispered. Long time ago. She didn't get out. She stayed, and it killed her. I looked up, startled. She didn't have anyone. No brother. No money. No one to tell her she was worth more. She hesitated. But you do. Then, from inside her apron, she pulled a folded page torn from Life magazine. She handed it to me, then slipped out without another word. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was an ad help wanted. Young women for telephone operator training. Room and board provided. Apply Southern Bell. Bismarck. ND. I stared at it for a long time. My heartbeat returned to my ears, not from fear, from something older, deeper, like the beat of a drum in the distance, calling me towards something new. That night, I crept into the study. Douglas had been drinking. His snoring echoed faintly from the guest room where he'd passed out. The drawer to his desk wasn't locked. He didn't think he had to lock it. I took $60 in bills. My hands shook, but I did it, not to survive, but to leave, to begin, to belong to myself again. The plan was simple, but every step felt like dancing across the edge of a knife. Mrs. Parker had a brother named Carl. He drove a produce truck that delivered to the estate's kitchen once a month. I'd seen him before, always in a cap too big for his head, smelling of onions and tobacco. He didn't say much, but his eyes were kind. He'll come at midnight, Mrs. Parker whispered one morning as she changed my sheets. He'll knock once. Soft, back kitchen door. I'll cover the shift. That afternoon, while the rest of the house moved like clockwork, I packed what I could fit into a small valise. 2 dresses, 1 cardigan, a hairbrush, and the pearl necklace. I hated it truly, but it was worth something, and I would need every cent. That evening, I wrote 2 letters. One was to Douglas. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even long. Just a few lines to let him know I was gone and that I would not be coming back. Douglas, by the time you read this, I will be far from here. Don't look for me. I am not your wife. I am not your possession. I am Victoria Andrews, and I choose to live. I left it on his pillow, neatly folded. The second letter was to Mama and Lily, though I wasn't sure it would ever reach them. I tucked it into my valise. Maybe someday I'd find a way to send it. At 11:30, the house went still. Mrs. Hendrickson retired like always after locking every door, double-checking every curtain. I waited 15 long minutes, sitting on the edge of the bed, coat already on, shoes laced. The rain had started sometime after dinner, soft and steady at first. By midnight, it had turned heavy sheets of it pouring down, soaking the roof and flooding the stone steps. At 12:01, I heard the knock. I crept through the dark hallway, careful to avoid the third stair that creaked. The kitchen smelled like yeast and bleach. Mrs. Parker waited by the back door, her apron damp, her face pale. "He's here," she whispered. I reached for her hand. "Thank you," I said, meaning every word. "You saved my life." She handed me a small brown paper package, sandwiches for the road, and she pressed something into my palm. It was a tiny silver cross on a chain. "Keep it with you." I hugged her, hard and quick, and stepped out into the night. Carl stood beside the old pickup truck, his cap pulled low, rain slicking his jacket. He took my bag without a word and opened the door. "You Mrs. Parker's girl?" he asked softly. "I am." "Then let's go." The truck roared to life, louder than I wanted, but no one came to the windows. No lights flicked on. The estate slept like the grave. As we rolled down the service road, I kept my head low, heart hammering. I half expected someone to burst from the shadows. "Douglas, Mrs. Hendrickson," the house staff with lanterns and accusations. But no one came. The rear gate creaked open, the truck bumped over the ruts, and suddenly we were free of the estate. I sat up a little straighter in my seat. The road curved west toward Dickinson. The rain slapped against the windshield, the wipers beating in time with my pulse. "Bus leaves at 1:30, Carl said. "You got a ticket? I have money." I said. He nodded. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the ride. We pulled into the station just after 1:00. A single fluorescent light flickered above the door. Inside, a bored clerk sat behind the ticket window, reading a magazine, a few travelers' truckers, a soldier in uniform, a mother with a sleeping toddler huddled on benches with coffee and wet coats. Carl parked by the curb. "You sure you're all right, miss?" he asked. I hesitated, then looked him in the eyes. For the first time in a long time, "I think I am." He nodded. "Tell my sister you made it. Will you?" "I will." I stepped inside the station, my valise in hand. The clerk looked up as I approached the counter. "One way to Bismarck," I said, voice steady. "Leaves in 25 minutes, he said, tearing the ticket. "That'll be $6.50. I paid with the stolen bills, my hands steady now, and tucked the ticket inside my coat. At 1:30 a.m. The bus arrived, a silver behemoth with foggy windows and a faint smell of diesel and worn-out dreams. I climbed aboard, found a seat by the window, and clutched my bag tight. The doors closed. The driver called out, "Bismarck," and the wheels turned. Outside, the world was dark and wet, fields blurred by rain and memory. I didn't look back. I closed my eyes. And for the first time since I was taken from that cottonwood tree, I exhaled. Bismarck greeted me with wind. Not the cruel kind that had swept across the estate's hills, but something different, livelier, restless. It whipped through my coat as I stepped off the bus just before dawn, the gray light stretching over the station platform like a cautious promise. I had no one waiting for me, no address, just the name of a cousin I hadn't seen in years, Mary Beth Carmichael, and the crumpled note Sam had given me with directions to her boarding house near the riverfront. I walked the streets as the city woke. The sidewalks were slick with last night's rain. Delivery trucks rattled by. The scent of coffee from a corner diner nearly broke me. My stomach ached with hunger and nerves, but I kept moving. By the time I found Mary Beth's place, a narrow 3-story home with peeling green paint and flower boxes struggling against the cold, I could barely lift my feet. I knocked 3 times. When the door opened, the woman standing there looked older than I remembered, rounder, her hair tucked into a worn scarf, but her eyes were kind, and after one long, stunned moment, she whispered, "Victoria." I nodded. She didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside. "Get in here. Honey, let's warm you up." Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and old wood. A fire crackled in a tiny parlor. I sat on a couch, patched at the seams, while Mary Beth brought me tea and a wool blanket. "You're safe now," she said, touching my arm. "Whatever happened back there, you're safe now." That night, I slept in a small attic room with sloped ceilings and a view of the river. The bed creaked. The blankets were thin, but I'd never felt more at peace. For the first time in over a year, I was sleeping in a room no one else had the key to. In the morning, I rose early and helped Mary Beth bake bread. She ran the boarding house mostly alone and could always use an extra pair of hands. "Plenty of girls come through here looking for work," she said, kneading dough like it owed her money. "You're not the first with a bruised past. You won't be the last." I asked her about the telephone operator job ad, and her face lit up. "Oh, that's a real thing," she said. "Southern Bell's hiring. They'll train you too if you're willing to work hard." "I am," I said. So we walked to the office together that afternoon. The building was tucked between a drugstore and a tailor's shop. Inside, everything smelled of ink and machine oil. A woman in a navy blue dress with a clipboard sized me up the way Mrs. Hendrickson once did, but this time, the feeling didn't strip me. It made me stand straighter. "You ever operate a switchboard before?" she asked. "No, ma'am." She looked me over again. "You're polite, clean. You'll learn." I started the next Monday. The training was harder than I expected. The cords tangled. The buzzers rang without mercy. I made mistakes, got yelled at. But every night I walked home through the crisp Dakota air with my chin high. Because this pain, this learning, belonged to me. It was mine. Weeks passed. I earned my first paycheck, $12.50, for 2 weeks of work. I held that envelope like it was gold. I used it to pay Mary Beth rent, bought a second-hand coat, and tucked a little away in a coffee tin beneath my bed. One evening, Mary Beth handed me a letter addressed in Sam's handwriting. I sat on the back step, the paper trembling in my hands. "Victoria, I heard you made it. Mrs. Parker told me. I can't tell you how proud I am of you. Daddy's been asking questions, Mama too. Maybe someday you'll want to write back. But for now, just know we're thinking of you. Love." "Sam," I cried for a long time after reading that letter, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in ages, I didn't feel alone. Freedom wasn't easy. It was cold rooms and long shifts. It was learning to say no without flinching. It was waking up in the dark and walking to work while the city was still asleep, but it was mine. I had escaped. I had survived, and little by little, I was beginning to live. The first winter I spent in Bismarck was harsh. Snow piled against the doors like stubborn memory. The sidewalks froze. My breath hung in the air each morning like a soft ghost. But something in me had changed. I wasn't the girl who flinched at the creak of floorboards anymore. I was becoming someone else. The telephone office was my sanctuary. I became fast, reliable. Soon, I was helping train the new girls. I found myself drawn to the shy ones, the ones who wore long sleeves even indoors, who jumped when you said their name too loudly. Girls like me. One of them was named Evelyn Knox, barely 19, with bruises she never talked about and eyes that refused to meet your gaze. She reminded me of the girl I used to be quiet, folded in on herself like she was trying to disappear. I started walking her home, just gently, no questions, and one night, on a wind-chilled corner, under the yellow light of a street lamp, she whispered, "He hits me when the beer runs out." I stopped walking. She stared down at her shoes. "He says it's my fault, that I'm too slow, that I talk back, even when I'm quiet." My chest tightened. I didn't tell her to leave. I didn't rush in with grand advice. I just reached out and took her hand. "I know," I said. "I believe you. Sometimes that's all someone needs." After that, more girls began to trust me, operators, laundresses, secretaries. Stories unfolded over lunch breaks and shared bus rides. Stories of broken ribs and silent pregnancies, of lives lived in fear behind neat doors and drawn curtains. I couldn't ignore it. I started saving more from my pay. I bought used furniture from the church basement. I convinced Mary Beth to rent out one of the storage rooms behind the boarding house. Together, we cleaned it out, painted the walls, and turned it into something more than a room. A refuge. I called it the Blue Room, a quiet place where women could rest, hide, or simply breathe. Mary Beth and I stocked it with blankets, first aid supplies, a hot plate, and a radio. Word traveled fast. Within a month, Evelyn stayed 3 nights after her husband kicked her out. 2 weeks later, a woman named Clara knocked at our door at midnight, her cheek swollen, her baby bundled against her chest. We never asked for their full names. We didn't need them. We just let them in. The room saved lives. I didn't have much, but what I had, I gave. One evening, after scrubbing the floor of the Blue Room, Mary Beth handed me an envelope. Inside was $200. "What's this?" I asked. "A donation," she said. "A grateful mother from Fargo who heard what you're doing. She wants you to keep going." I clutched the money like it might fly away. "You've started something," Mary Beth said. "People are noticing. Women need you." I'd never been a leader. I'd never dreamed of being one. But I couldn't deny what was happening. The broken pieces of my life, the pain, the silence, the fight it had shaped me into someone women could trust, someone they could run to. Later that month, I filed for a business license, Medora Women's Aid Collective, named for the town I escaped, because I wanted to redeem that name. I wanted Medora to mean something new, not chains, but courage. We rented a small house with 3 bedrooms and a garden. The local paper ran a story on it. Telephone girl turned survivor into shelter founder. I nearly choked when I read that headline. But maybe they were right. I had turned surviving into something more. Years passed. I never remarried, though I dated once or twice. I didn't need a man to fix me. I had fixed myself. Sam visited once, tall now, with gray at his temples. He brought Mama and Lily. We cried on the porch, holding each other like we'd waited a decade for it. And we had. Mama apologized. She didn't try to explain away what had happened. She just said, "I didn't know how to fight for you, but I see now that you fought for yourself, and I'm proud." So was I. The Medora Collective grew. We opened a second shelter in Fargo, then one in Rapid City. Dozens of women found safety behind our doors. Hundreds more found strength in our support. One day, Evelyn, now a shelter manager herself, asked me how I'd had the courage to start it all. I looked at her and smiled. Because no one did it for me. I turned 74 this past spring. There's a little bench outside the shelter now, beneath a maple tree that glows orange every fall. I sit there some mornings with a cup of tea and watch the girls, young women, mostly coming and going with their children, their bags, their second chances. Some leave after a week. Others stay for months. A few come back later, not as victims, but as volunteers. That's when I know it's working. That's when I know I worked. I still keep that pearl necklace. It sits in a tin box at the back of my closet, right next to the cross, Mrs. Parker gave me the night I escaped. I've never sold either. Not because I treasure the items themselves, but because they remind me that even in the darkest parts of my story, I was never truly alone. I look at them and remember who I was, who I became, and who I chose to be, when no one else chose for me. If you'd told that frightened girl in Medora that one day she'd open safe houses across the state of North Dakota, she would have laughed or cried, maybe both, but this life, this purpose, it was carved from survival, from silence, from strength no one knew I had. And now I pass it on, because I don't believe pain should be wasted. If it taught you something, if it made you softer or stronger or wiser, then it wasn't in vain. Here's what I want you to remember. You are not what was done to you. You are what you do next. And you always, always have the right to choose differently. That's what freedom means. Not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice and the courage to use it. So if you're watching this maybe with tears in your eyes or your heart beating a little harder, I want you to know this story isn't just mine. It's yours too. If you've lived through hurt, if you've been silenced, ignored, used, if you've ever believed you weren't strong enough to start over, you're wrong. You're already stronger than you think. And your story isn't over, not yet. If this story moved you, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what part touched your heart, or tell us your story, because someone out there might need to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, raw, real, and full of hope, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us keep sharing voices that matter. From my heart to yours, thank you for listening, thank you for believing, and thank you for surviving. Victoria Andrews.